But thank you. As Dr. Morano said, my name is Keith Cole. I'm the Assistant Director for Administration and Finance at the Borlaug Institute. Been there for about 10 years now, and have increasingly been tasked with helping lead our new business development, which includes looking at AID funding opportunities. So what I'd like to do is give you just some context on the types of projects that the Institute has done, and then give you just a real 30,000-foot overview of the different types of funding mechanisms and what the process is. I mean, this morning you've had great examples of effective projects, but there's not been a discussion yet of, okay, going forward, how do I access that? How do I get to do some of those types of projects? So, to give you some context, figure out how to drive this. This is a list of current and recent projects in the last 10 years or so in which the Institute has been involved in. Those that are in boldface are current. Those that are in italics are recently over. And more importantly, for the context of our discussion today, those in blue are Feed the Future priority countries. So out of the 20 or some odd priority countries that have been identified as for Feed the Future, the Institute has already, or is, working in about half of those. And as Gary was alluding to, relationships are very important. USAID is a different type of organization, and I was pleased to see that some people raised their hands earlier today and said they have worked with USAID. And so what I'm going to say may be old hat for you, but for those who have not, we need to talk about some of the nuances of working with USAID. The current portfolio at the Institute is about $56 million. We're gunning for Dr. Dodada. We're not there yet. But we've got some things in the pipeline, so we look forward to catching up to Virginia Tech. In the pipeline, and I want to talk a little bit about funding, because there's been some discussion about, is there going to be sufficient funding with this? Is that okay? We are looking at about $185 million worth of projects in the pipeline right now, the Institute alone. Those are either proposals that have been submitted, proposals we're developing right now, or those that we know are going to come out soon and we will very likely bid on. We certainly know we're not going to receive all of these. Often these will be partnerships, so even when we are successful, we're not going to have all of that funding. But it is a significant amount of funds that are in the pipeline that we are looking at. So the best place to start, and it's not out yet, so I can't share it with you, but I'll be discussing with Elsa when it does come out how to get it out to everybody, is to look at USAID's business forecast. And what that is a document that they put out annually and update periodically saying that these are the types of activities USAID intends to award in the future, in the coming year. It's not an exact document. It's not set in stone, but it'll generally describe the type of activity, the value, the period of performance. Is it 1 year? Is it 5 years? The type of award that it will be, and that matters. And the quarter, the fiscal quarter, they anticipate that to be released. So for those in the room who are interested in pursuing Feed the Future opportunities, when we do get the FY12 business forecast out, we can make that available. Because one of the key things you want to be doing is looking at those projects much earlier in advance. If you look at it and want to bid on it when the RFA or the RFP is released, you're pretty much behind the curve already at that point. Because USAID will, and I see some nodding heads, USAID generally gives you 4, if you're lucky, 6 weeks to put this together. So you need to be doing that kind of work in advance. Let's see. Okay. So when they do actually release the RFA or the RFP, and again, for AID, semantics matter. These are different types of awards. They will do so through one of two portals. If it's an RFA, request for application, it'll come out as a cooperative agreement. And if you're familiar with grants.gov, which I'm sure many of you are, it'll be released or announced there. If it's a contract, which is a different award, and we'll talk a little bit about those distinctions, it'll be released through FedBizOps. And so these are two different websites you would have to go to. But if you've done your previous work looking at the business forecast, then you know to be looking periodically to see when these are released. And you can also go into both websites and log in and receive notices emailed to you when things have been updated, there's been responses to questions asked, there's been a change in the RFA, et cetera. So, to compare and contrast these two, but there are cooperative agreements and there are contracts. The cooperative agreements, as I said, will come out through grants.gov, and they will be in the form of an RFA, a request for application. Both types of awards have pros and cons to them. In the USAID parlance, a cooperative agreement is an assistance award. They are, relatively speaking, a lot more flexible to implement as the implementing agency. There are lower risk generally. There may be cost share required or matching. I often say that's kind of the cost of doing business, or the price of admission, if you will, by being able to have that extra flexibility, is because you're also bringing your own resources to the table. Then on the other hand, there's no fee allowed, and I'm not talking about overhead or IDC, but there's no fee allowed. But you are allowed to co-brand, which means you're able to market it as both USAID and Texas AgriLife in all your materials. Compared to a contract, and Feed the Future programs will be released through both of these. We're already seeing these beginning to come out. And I don't claim to understand AID's wisdom of why they choose to do one through another, but it is what it is. When a contract comes out, or I'm sorry, an RFP, request for proposals, it's considered an acquisition award. You're literally working for the U.S. government. AID is your client. They're less flexible. AID has a much more say in what's going on. They're a little bit higher risk because it is a contract. You do have certain deliverables you have to meet. But from a revenue standpoint, you're allowed to charge a fee. You know, that's something to keep in mind, particularly in lean budget times. Another thing to keep in mind is that I assume most of you have worked with USDA-funded awards, and typically USDA is capped at 10%. You know, we are all in the business here at the Institute because of the mission of improving food security, but we're also recognize there is a revenue component to this and an operational component. So it's important to know that USAID usually allows full overhead rates. So you're not going to be capped at 10%. Now you can split that between on-campus, off-campus, as appropriate on the type of activity, but there is an opportunity for more revenue to be coming in. And then there's one other variation of this, which we're beginning to see increasingly, and it's the one that I like the most, is now they're doing annual program statements. It's a type of cooperative agreement, but it's a two-phase funding process. So if you've not worked with AID, if you've not bid on an AID project before, this might be the ideal one to start with. Because in this process, you put together a 5 to 10-page concept paper and a 1-page illustrative budget. And that's it. And you submit it to AID. You know, Tim Davis and I have put together one for Indonesia that now he's directing, and we went just through this process, and we're looking at another one. And Linda Klobosky and I are looking at one for Ethiopia that'll be done that way. If AID likes the concept paper, then they come back to you and ask for a full proposal. But what's nice about that is that you've had more time to think about this. They will come back and make suggestions, recommendations. We like this, but you didn't address that. And so you can really fine-tune your proposal. And so that's really an ideal way for people to break into this process. And then finally, a couple things you'll want to use, and I'll leave it up for questions, is when you are responding to these, you do need to always go to the AID website and find the country plan. There's always a country strategy, because everything that you'll be putting into the proposal needs to align with that if you're going to be successful. If it's a Feed the Future country, there will also be a specific Feed the Future strategy for that country. And that's going to vary from country to country. So you would need to find that as well and use that as a resource when you're developing the proposal. And then lastly, it's not a Feed the Future thing per se, but it's something that can really add value to the proposal process, is AID has a program called the Global Development Alliance, or GDA. And in a nutshell, that is a program where AID will bring additional funds to the table that are matched by the private sector. So for those of you who have good, strong industry contacts and can identify an opportunity that your industry contact is interested in, that AID is interested in, then that's a whole nother avenue of bringing more resources to the table to implement the program. It's a very successful way to work. We are doing this in Rwanda right now with the S.C. Johnson Company, for example. So for those of you, and I'm looking at Dr. Lunt, we've talked about this, as you think about your industry contacts, this might be something to consider.